It's a really interesting thing to be a part of a project, both at this scale and this close to what I have done in the past and what I know how to do, which involves letting go. So setting up the team in the best ways that I possibly can with the smallest number of software packages, the best sort of operational Tetris, the most capabilities, and then to hand it over.
Today I sat down with the exceptional JD Sassaman. With a master's in architecture from MIT and a certificate in fine woodworking from the College of the Redwoods, Jay's background spans technology, craft, and design. Creating communities and enabling collaboration are at the heart of Jay's work to support the development of responsive future visions and responsible technologies. Jay's vast knowledge and skills have recently been instrumental in the development of Ford's Innovation Campus, a groundbreaking project that focuses on e-mobility innovation in downtown Detroit. We talked about the importance of teamwork, cultivating a positive work culture, and unlocking the potential of individuals within a team. Join us as we delve into Jay's remarkable journey, exploring insights on technology, design, craftsmanship, and the joy of creation. For the last few episodes, I've been on the go, recording throughout other work travel and kind of being a one-man band as far as recording goes. And unfortunately, I was so excited to start chatting with Jay, I forgot to press record on the mic mixer for this episode. So we had to use the audio from the camera recording. My apologies for the quality. This was still a fantastic conversation, so I hope you'll be able to enjoy it regardless. Here's our conversation. We live in a time where design and technology touch every aspect of our lives. But where did it all come from? Who designed it? How was it built and brought to market? What will it look like in a year, 2 years, 100 years? From the phones and smartwatches that help us in our day-to-day to the cutting-edge spaceships and 3D printers that are leading us into the future, modern design is constantly shaping the way we work, communicate, problem solve, and play. And every new design, big or small, starts with an idea and a bill of materials. I'm Majenta Strongheart, and this is The Bomb, where we talk to leading innovators in the tech world and celebrate the transformational power of design. So I wanted to reach out to you ever since you joined the committee.
Oh, great.
So honestly, I had an email drafted way back and then kind of got, distracted with things. And then recently was in Detroit and caught up with Nikki, who's the co-chair of SSMC. And she mentioned that you were involved in Ford's Innovation Center there, and a few people while I was there, because I was talking to a few different old shop connections, but also was visiting the Siemens lift facility, which is, are you familiar? No, Lyft is in Detroit, MXD is in Chicago. Okay. But they're very similar facilities, and they're both also larger campuses that are sponsored by the Department of Defense.
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's an American Base.
Yes, exactly.
Facility, right.
And then she mentioned, you were involved in this Ford campus, and I was like, oh my gosh, I really need to reach out to Jay and talk about all these things.
Yeah.
And then was really excited when you were up to do the Bomb recording with me. So thanks for joining me. And yeah, maybe we can kind of start there. I would love for you to give kind of the elevator spiel on what your work is right now currently. Mm-hmm. And then we'll kind of rewind to how you got to there.
Sure, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. The work I'm currently doing is working as a consultant for that project in Detroit you're talking about, which is the Michigan Central campus that Ford is building in downtown Detroit with a focus on e-mobility innovation. And they've got a couple of historic buildings on the site. They've got the book depository, the Michigan Central train station, and they're renovating those spaces and building them out. The first one to come online is this book depository. And so Ford reached out to New Lab, who's got this innovation space in Brooklyn, with around 600 companies. They've got shared shops at the center of it. They support those companies in a whole bunch of different ways. Ford is working with New Lab to create a new lab in Detroit. So I know New Lab because they started up after we started the Pier 9 workshop with Autodesk. And they were familiar with our space, and we gave them some advice on setting up their space in Brooklyn. So when they're doing the second project, they came back and said, we've got a new project. do you know anyone who could help us out? And I was like,
You're like, me.
ding, 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 ding. Yeah, exactly. I'll put my hand up. So it's been almost, it'll be 2 years this fall that I've been working with them. And it's been a super exciting project to go from a blank floor plan to it's about 20,000 square feet of fabrication facilities that I'm working on as their consultant. So everything from speccing their scale and scope of what they're going to support fabrication wise, what kind of processes they want to have in-house versus what they're going to sub out of house for their members, and then all the way down to like the blue tape and golf pencils.
Okay.
So it's like we've gone from big picture,
right.
Budgeting, time frames, working with the architects, working on all the mechanical, electrical specs and everything down to speccing the equipment, building out databases of equipment, procuring all the equipment, checking that it's being received, working with the receiving team, helping them get their shop staff set up. And then they're launching.
Yeah.
So members are there, the shops are running, things are happening.
And so the members, this is a public access kind of membership where you pay a fee and you have a monthly access, or it's internal for Ford, or?
So Ford is a partner in this, but New Lab is going to run the space.
Okay, got it.
And they're going to use the same model that they have in Brooklyn, which is you apply to be a New Lab member. And once you're a member, you can set up your company inside their space. They offer like co-working, amenities, as well as help you get your company off the ground. So once you're a New Lab member, then you can take the classes and get into the shops.
Got it. And what's usually, or you said this one's focused on mobility. So can you give us a few examples of what the kind of member cross-section is going to look like most likely? What kind of companies are going to be involved?
That's a really, really interesting question, and I'm excited to see what the answer is. I think that they're going to bring in members who are working on any kind of technology related to e-mobility. So whether that's some kind of a sensor system that's going to go into a pack in the door, mm-hmm. whether that is looking at a complete vehicle, whether that is a final mile vehicle like a hoverboard, or mm-hmm. whether that is a component of a car or truck, I have no idea. I think, based on what I've seen in other spaces, is that the smallest companies are going to come in with a lot of energy and a strong idea, and they're going to come out as something very different.
Mm-hmm. Always. I mean, that's the story. Any startup, right? Yeah. Pivot.
That's what I would expect. And I hope that the shops that we're building there are going to allow them to physically develop their product really quickly and run through those design iterations and ideas and concepts and
be able to be experimental and continuing to change and evolve. Definitely. Yeah. And I'm already thinking like my wheels are spinning on who I'm like, there's so many people I know that should go check it out and maybe get involved, as far as some startups we've worked with over the last few years, who have really interesting solutions and kind of ideas around that space. I'm kind of bummed I didn't check out the space when I was there. Like next time I'll have to find a way to get in there and see it, because I'm sure it's incredible, especially with that kind of budget, it sounds like.
It's a gorgeous building too. I mean, 25-foot ceilings and just huge windows. And
what are like the top 3 tools or machines that you were so excited to get to purchase for the space? You're just like, this is so awesome.
It's a great question. Okay, well, my background is in furniture, fine furniture and woodworking. So we spec'd the Martin joiner and planer combo. And I'm just like, I know there are some beautiful old machines, old joiners and planers out there that you have to spend like 2 days setting the knives on. But these Martin joiner and planer, I'm just like, I dream of getting to use them. Along with like everything produced by Festool.
Yeah.
But the wood shop is where my heart is.
And I know, I really wish we could get a lathe. I've said this before on the podcast. Like, I would love if we could get a lathe at DesignLab, but we just can't really justify it. But from a woodworking perspective, that's like, I would love to have that. Yeah.
It feels to me like one of the most fluid machines to work on. Mm-hmm. So much like working with ceramics.
It's like meditative.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I used to teach throwing classes in Chicago when I was in school there. So I also totally hear what you're saying. Yeah, with ceramics, it can be such almost like therapeutic, where you can just get in the zone and be developing something like really intuitively.
Yep. Yeah. Depending on what you're working on.
Yes, of course. Or it's super frustrating. You're like, why can't I get this perfect wall thickness, right?
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. So maybe we can go back then. Well, I'm kind of curious. I don't want to totally leave this project yet. With this Ford new lab space, how long do you continue to work in your role with them beyond the open date?
Yeah, well, it's been an evolving project. So I joined almost 2 years ago and have gone from that macro scale all the way down to the micro. The space is open, and it's been open for a few months now. So I think it opened in April, officially ribbon cutting. And I'm going to be working on that for probably another 6 months. All of that is a transition to the team that they're bringing in to run the space. Mm-hmm. And it's a really interesting thing to be a part of a project, both at this scale and this close to what I have done in the past and what I know how to do, which involves letting go. So setting up the team in the best ways that I possibly can with the smallest number of software packages, the best sort of operational Tetris, the most capabilities, and then to hand it over. So it definitely is something new for me in terms of just letting this go out into the wild, because I think that a lot of what's exciting about these spaces is setting the culture and bringing people into that culture in a way that will unlock more possibilities and potentials for their team, for their process, for the development of their product ultimately. But that interaction is where things get super complicated and messy and gooey and human.
Yeah, because it's people.
It's people. Yeah. And I think it's also very exciting and very energizing. So there's a part of this, like you're asking about my favorite tools. I certainly have, and I enjoy getting into the technical details and the capabilities and sort of geeking out on that end. But to me, the biggest and most interesting challenge is on the people end. Yeah. And is how does someone feel when they walk into this space? Because that feeling, I think, reverberates through whatever they do
definitely
next.
Going to influence how they're able to work in that space comfortably, imaginatively, and really be, I think, bring their best selves and their best ideas each day that they're in there. And so I'm curious on that, from that perspective, what are some of the key traits you look for in these team members? Do you have, I'm sure it's complicated, it's dynamic, but are there kind of some top things that you're always looking for across the board in hiring or in setting up these teams?
Yeah, sure. A willingness to engage, be in it, ask questions, answer questions.
Curiosity.
Yeah, and be humble in that in some way. I can speak most directly to the team that I've brought on to spec this space and to develop this project, because I've done my consultancy in a really lean way, where I've brought on sort of subject matter experts. We've got about 10 different technical areas, everywhere from robotics to finishing to casting. And, I've brought on somebody for each one of those areas that I've been working with. And in this role that I'm in, and I think with any technical fabrication space of this size, nobody can be the expert on everything.
Right.
My job is to be fluent enough to make good decisions with those subject matter experts and to ask a lot of questions. And the fun part is that learning process. And I think for each person in this that I work with, my goal is to bring on somebody who's gonna get me excited about their area of expertise, that's gonna want to engage with me, that's gonna want to go deep, but also somewhere in there, have fun with it.
Absolutely. And also want to keep learning, like you're saying, and be curious. I think that's super important, and something that I kind of one of my personal mottos is never grow up, never stop learning, and never stop growing. And I think that is one of my favorite parts of my job, is that I'm always learning not only new technical skills and things and through other people's experience and their stories, what's the latest, software they're using, their latest tool for this, this mechanical process that they need to accomplish. But also obviously those soft skills or life skills or those kinds of things. Right. And I love that you're really prioritizing curiosity, because I think that's huge. And like you said, kind of a humbleness to be an expert, but not be condescending or, intimidating, which I think is something, I think anyone who's been in a shop space can relate to, that feeling when you feel like you might, you're not going to feel welcome to ask questions or make mistakes in a space.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and the asking questions, it also becomes a safety issue in a lot of these spaces. If you have a culture that's built around like silent knowing, which also means often silently knowing who the right person is to ask and knowing when they're in the back of the shop to go bother them and like whatever else, it's fundamentally unsafe. And in the shop spaces, that's clear. You can get hurt physically, but it's also indicative of what is underneath and just what it feels like to be in those spaces and those places. And that it makes a ton of sense. I mean, especially when you look at the kind of technology that's coming out like on a monthly basis for shops, when you're talking about metal 3D printers and you're talking about all the different variety of materials and the different, so there's a new 3D printer company, every half an hour, that nobody's an expert.
Right. And you're always having to learn and keep up with the technology.
Yeah.
Really. I was curious when you're talking about software, are there software sponsors for the space?
Nope.
Okay. Interesting. So when you were talking about kind of picking the best software for operation and stuff, is that covering mostly like the back end of things kind of in the back end organization, or literally like the software that's going to send the models to the tools, going to run the tools, etc.? Or is it kind of going to be up to the members, because everyone comes in there sometimes with their favorite of what they like working with?
Sure. I think when you're on the design side, it would be up to members, and there are a couple of front runners because tools like Fusion are developing post processors and connection to CAM that make it easier to get onto a whole huge variety of different machines. But when you're talking about, getting handheld laser scanners, do you get two different scanners that each have their own proprietary software package? Now you're paying for licenses, but also your shop staff now has to know how to operate both of those.
Specific.
And that's true in each of these shop spaces.
Yes.
Just like how many different manufacturer specific software tools are you going to bring in? Because that can be your barrier to entry.
Absolutely.
And it's just like endlessly frustrating.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that you're being mindful of that from the setup stage, because that can make such a difference. Again, kind of even influencing like the culture of how it's going to run into the future and how they're going to take on those challenges. Okay, so I think we could geek out on this forever, clearly. But I'm going to, switch it up a little bit and rewind, like we said. And I'd love to hear just kind of your career path getting to this point. Also, I guess before we get there, I should ask, like, do you like what you do right now? Are you happy to be in this space? Like, in this consulting role, is this close to your dream of what you want to be doing? And I'm sorry, I did not prepare you for some of these questions.
Of course.
I realize they just come organically.
Yeah, of course. I think I would say 50-50. Like half the time, yes. Because what I love about consulting in this way is that I'm not dragged into a bunch of meetings I don't need to be in, where I'm just like watching stuff flow by.
This could have been an email.
Yeah, exactly. I'm only doing the part that pertains to me that I find interesting or pursue or, interject or ask to do. But that, and getting to pull together a team of people who I love to work with.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
Super awesome. Because every time I get onto Zoom with them, I'm like, what's up? Yeah. This is great. But the downside is that I'm also using a lot of online collaboration tools like Slack and Airtable so that we're like real time all working together. Great. However, it's lonely. And I feel that. And I
miss working in the physical spaces.
It's like a huge part of why I got to where I am. Is because I love being in those spaces with people and
making stuff.
Yeah, and having my messy process be interwoven with everyone else's messy processes and bumping into them in the hallway. And I feel like that's where a lot of those exchanges and inspirations and
aha moments happen.
The good stuff.
Absolutely.
So I miss that a lot. And I think, unfortunately, that getting into that world of like database management, which is a big part of what this is, it clicks me into a mode where I could just like disappear for 12 hours and I would come out the other side like hungry and dehydrated.
Yeah.
And while that is a useful ability to focus, it's not.
Yeah.
How I
Maybe
wanna
not
live
the
my
greatest.
life.
Yeah.
You know.
Balance. Totally. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. So how did you get into this kind of work, and what first got you inspired to be in design and fabrication and these shop spaces?
Well, not to throw like my entire family under the bus, but
It wasn't that.
It wasn't that. Like I was on the phone with my brother sometime recently, and he had a problem that we were talking about it. And he was like, "Can I fix this with my Christmas hammer?" And I was like,
What's this Christmas hammer? The hammer you got for Christmas from you?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it's like a hammer
that
that has like, Christmas trees painted on the handle. Or,
I was like, is this a tool I don't know about for Christmas?
No.
That's hilarious.
Like not officially a tool, but it's like, do you think this would work?
It's like a toy hammer.
Exactly. It's like a novelty hammer. Yes.
That
exactly.
is cracking me up. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Also just quick relevant side story. It reminds me the direction I was thinking you were going was you gifted him a hammer for Christmas, and that's what he was
No way.
to.
It's like way too dangerous for what he's gonna do with it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, because I recently gifted my younger brother a Japanese pole saw, because I think that's like the number one most versatile, useful tool you could have in your car, in your backyard, in your garage, whenever you might need it. So I'm like, I'm going to get all my younger cousins one day. It's going to be just a tradition, I think. And so that's where I was going. I was like, maybe it's something Jay gifted him.
Nope. I would not gift my brother a tool.
Well, that says a lot already about your family. So it wasn't your family.
Like, and I mean that like with complete respect.
Respect always.
So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. In some ways, I got involved in theater. Theater, it's super fun.
Theater. And my favorite part was not the acting, it was all the production, like making the set and the props, all of that.
Yep.
Even though I was supposed to be there to do like acting lessons.
There you go. Yeah, I only got involved in the set building part, and almost because of a roommate. Nice. I think that's how I ended up there. But then it was really exciting. Whole new skill set, and I got into building some carpentry skills, and then I went to the College of the Redwoods in Northern California for their year-long fine furniture program, and it's only 20 people. It's 6 days a week. You're all in one room, and you basically start the program not only by trying futilely to make one piece of wood flat and square, which is absolutely impossible. Because overnight the temperature and the humidity changes and everything, and so you come back the next day and it's definitely not square anymore. But then you also build your own hand tools, and then you end up making furniture with the tools that you built.
My favorite things is like the things you need to make the things you need to make. So the jigs, the tools, all of that is the best. So that's really cool. So you guys are making planes. What other kind of tools?
A lot of hand planes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mostly
marking knives and
and would you also work on the blades and things too, or you're mostly making like the case and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we would work a little bit on the blades. We had the opportunity to make our own blades, but mostly we sharpen.
Okay.
Like until our fingerprints were gone.
Yes.
Yeah. So just like endless sharpening with Japanese water stones.
So are you really good at always having sharp knives in your house? Does that translate?
I would say before kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair.
a lot of things on the craft end of my lifestyle have slid. But yeah, and I think so that was like an adventure to one end of the spectrum, and like an immersive experience in the world of craft and thinking about things through a craft lens. And after that year, I really I came back to San Francisco, and I was working for an architect and doing custom building stuff, and also building out a shop and model making and all different kinds of things. But I realized that architects are thinking and working at this larger scale that was really interesting. And so that's when my personal pendulum swung from this small craft, long tradition school with a sort of guru figure of James Krenov to the other end of the spectrum, to doing my master's in architecture at MIT. And the two couldn't be
further apart.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Aside from the
MIT
fact,
is so like engineering heavy. I would imagine
yes,
even in architecture, I'm sure that you have that influence just because of the
absolutely, and research driven, and really approaching things from a research mindset. The similarity is that they're both very small programs and pretty intimate. And the MIT experience was extremely intense. I feel like I survived it, and I learned a lot. And it just blew open my mind around all of what's possible. I think that after that, I swung back to somewhere that feels like it's in the middle of those. And so I really love being in these spaces where you go from design to fabrication, and seeing how you translate from 2D to 3D and how you bring something alive. And I feel like, to me, that's the most exciting space. That's where like it's this hyper speed volume, like tons of stuff changes and happens in that, because you realize that you drew one thing, but that doesn't exist in the world when you go to the hardware store. So then you change everything, then you buy these other brackets, and then suddenly whatever it is you were building is completely different. And going back and forth, traversing that line between physical and digital, also on the design and software end, so complicated. It's one thing to sort of build organically, like we were talking about with the wood lathe, where you're feeling the material, you're listening to the tool, the sounds that it's making in contact with the material. It's so different than designing in the 3D space like Rhino, Fusion, any of these other SketchUp, where you're just like floating in an infinite outer space. And like, if you forgot to assign the appropriate units at some point, you just change the units. And now your thing.
You can go back 3 steps and, change some measurement on one side and have it play out and back to, the current moment and your current design. It's pretty incredible. Even to see how that has changed, in the last 5 years. Some of those capabilities are insane with the CAD tools. But I'm curious what you feel is the value, because I think we probably feel it's more obvious, maybe I would imagine in our experience, but what's the value for those who maybe don't recognize this in being able to, even if it's a very minimal understanding, to know how to build something that you design? Because there's a lot of situations, a lot of big companies, right, where design and manufacturing or prototyping is totally siloed. Like, you're designing or engineering something, it's thrown over the wall, and then you go back and they might have to give you some changes later because something doesn't work in how it's produced. And obviously, I think in those roles, even those designers and engineers over time within their industry experience learn a lot about the processes. They have to. But what do you think about, I guess, even in the early stages of even design education or engineering education, having access to tools and actually building stuff with your hands?
Yeah. Well, I think on some kind of a basic level, it's very easy to design things in that infinite space that work out perfectly. It takes a lot of experience and understanding to design things that can be produced on machines that exist in our world right now, because there are limitations to the thickness of the material, the width of the knife, the bed size, the whatever else. But there's also a value in understanding the difference between those perfect digital models and just the imperfectness of our world, that you have to accommodate for in material variations or the kind of distortions that happen in your production process.
Like you were mentioning with the wood.
Environmental, and then just the humanness of it. I think that once you start making it, you interact with the fact that if you make that fitting too tight, then you can't press fit it. Now you have to get an arbor press. Now you have to involve these other tools. Once you add those other processes, you're walking across the shop. You have to get a cart that brings your material. You get into just the real world implications and complications of what it takes to actually make something. And that once you do that feedback loop, you go through the process enough times, it changes who you are as a designer. And you start thinking about an object, not just for its end use, not just for the materials available, not just for how you assemble it, but what it feels like when you hold that handle in your hand. It makes the entire project richer.
Right.
And
more real.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But honestly, I think the greatest value is at a personal level. Because I think that we are just monkeys who really need to see ourselves reflected in the world. And you make a thing, and then like you made that thing.
Yes.
And there's pride, and there's experience, and there's richness in that.
Yes.
I think to be alive, we have to do that.
Yes. I think that comes up a lot in these conversations where there's just something so empowering about taking something in your head or from a sketch or a 3D model and making it in real life. Absolutely. And it's something I've talked a lot about in the context, even one of our past guests, Emily Pillaton from Girls Garage. Yeah, we talked a lot about that and just how, what a difference it can make, especially for younger kids to be able to do that and how it can affect other things in your life. If you have that, it can kind of start to build this confidence, this independence, and then being able to share that with others and teach them how to do it. I think just continues that kind of cycle.
Absolutely. Emily Pillaton's amazing.
Yeah.
I really look up to.
I'm a huge fan. Yeah. When I first met her, I was just like, oh my gosh, this is such a cool moment. I've been such a huge fan of your work forever. And always talk about I wish I'd had access to that growing up. Would have been a game changer, but I'm so glad it exists now, and for generations to come. Absolutely. So I'd love to go now into, so after MIT, you're working for an architecture firm.
Was I? No, after MIT, I was working for a exhibit design company in Brooklyn.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. It's kind of in that nexus of interaction and design and testing.
People, community, building.
Yes.
And also dealing, I would imagine, with some interesting kind of clients in a way. If it's exhibits for artists or for curators or things.
Museum exhibits, really, really cool. That was for a company called Moe Inc., who are they're doing really fun, cool work. And then I got the job with Autodesk when they were just building out Pier 9 for the workshop. So I came in when the space was under construction still and was on a long journey with them for the next almost a decade, I think 8 years. And as it became a space and became a place, we went through a lot of different sort of generations or eras of what that was. But it was a really exciting ride. And the best, of course, part of that, all of that was the people, like with all these things. Yeah,
absolutely. When we did, I was telling you the detoured episode there, I remember something that stood out to me was, since it's on a pier, I remember our tour guide telling us about kind of some of the reinforcement and things that needed to happen to be able to prepare to have these huge machines and heavy equipment on this pier. So were you there during that phase of figuring out what was going to work and what you needed to do?
You know what? I came in after that. Okay. So they had finished with the rehabilitation of the actual pier pilings.
Yeah.
They did some ongoing work over the following years.
I'm sure, yeah.
But yes, the floors were done on the ground floor. They were still building out the mezzanine. Most of the big equipment was already in.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was everything else.
So speaking of the ways it evolved over the years, something I'm familiar with a little bit is how I know there was much more of an artist residency for a while. Then I remember there being more almost like residents that are like Levi's or like some of these companies, right? Mm-hmm. Could you kind of walk us through what was the original intention from Autodesk's perspective of what you guys wanted to accomplish with that space and then how it kind of evolved, as much as you're willing to share? Or
Sure. No, I mean, it's like, I gotta go back into the archive. But originally was growing out of the residency that was at Instructables, because Instructables had been acquired by Autodesk. Mm-hmm. And the pier was the first time that Instructables was going to be incorporated. And so it was an extension of the residency that they had at their previous office. And that was sort of the seed, but that grew into a giant jungle very quickly, in which we had tons of residents coming through.
Well, when you have a space like that, I mean, how could you not?
Yeah.
It's such a Yeah.
And the benefit of the backing of a big, huge corporation that like allowed us to build out a staff, we had a lot of the resources that we needed. And I think, frankly, that's a problem that a lot of these fabrication spaces have. It's not only the initial capital expense, that's a lot, but you have to have great people there consistently, and you've got to operate the space to facilitate all that equipment. And often that's like an afterthought, when really that's like the core of it. Totally. You have great people, things can happen. So it grew into an artisan residency program that went strong for many years. And as the company changed, and as they did corporate restructurings, and we moved from division to division, we were supporting the Fusion team as they were building up that product, and looking at how to use it on the equipment. And then we became part of the research division at some point. But then the shift moved towards manufacturing, and how could the space support like an exploration into
the future of that
future manufacturing. So then the residency changed from individuals to companies, and then looking at whether they're connected to Autodesk's like main customer bases, architecture, engineering, and manufacturing. So it changed a lot.
Yeah.
And the way that projects were facilitated in that space and how people used it also changed.
And your role changed a lot throughout that time.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and during that time, your role changed a ton. So
Yes.
We talked a little bit before we started this conversation, about kind of the evolution from, which I can relate to a lot, being on the shop floor and kind of managing shop practices and all of that, to growing into a little bit more of a like strategic partnerships and business development side of things. So I'd be curious to know, do you feel like you kind of fell into that naturally? Did you have a mentor through that process? Like, how did that kind of career evolution happen for you?
Well, let me throw in a couple of curveballs here.
Sure.
I think it was partly an evolution of where things were heading, how the company was changing, how they were changing their vision of leveraging these fabrication spaces, because then it got connected to other spaces that Autodesk had around the country.
Did they have other spaces like?
So they built out a space in Boston called the Boston Technology Center. And then they had a space in Toronto that they were building up. And then they had another space that came online through an acquisition in England. And then they had a space in Australia that also came through an acquisition.
So they were wanting to leverage kind of this network of spaces and think about it
as a network.
As them together.
Yeah. So how did my role evolve? Well, I was going to say, in the middle of all this, I got pregnant and had a kid. And I bring that up because not only did it entirely change my life,
of course,
but it changes what happens in the workspace. And I think we just have to be real about it. Because I had a leave of probably 6 months, and when I came back, things were different. And there are a lot of conversations that I just wasn't a part of. And so there were chunks of that evolution that I was and wasn't necessarily a part of, but then I was just there as part of the overall, corporate organism, and we just moved forward and things changed. But there were some big leadership changes at Autodesk and, reorganizations and all that kind of stuff. So I can't give you a direct line because I think it's actually kind of confusing and messy. But
a lot of contextual changes, basically.
Yeah.
That's that. No, that makes sense. And it sounds like what we're discussing in the beginning, as far as the pros and cons of like this consulting role, you miss some of the like in-person interaction in these shop spaces, and miss that kind of energy around building in community with these other people, other companies, other institutions, whatnot. Do you feel like, is that something you want to get back to one day, as far as being in a shop space, being more hands-on, or are you more just, what's next? Where can I take this consulting role further? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's a question that I'm also in for myself, is what next? I think that I don't want to be far from the process of making things, because that's been such a positive feedback loop and space of growth, and is also now like where so much of my technical expertise is around what's possible, what machines and equipment facilitate that. But I also think that I've done some research projects along the way that have been super rewarding. And so getting into those thought exercises allows me to get into the space of bigger thinking, systems thinking, problem solving at a level that's beyond like this piece of hardware, and how do I troubleshoot what I'm building right now? Is it that the blade isn't true? Is the table not level? Like, chasing those issues down and doing that at a bigger level, which is quite interesting. Especially I've been and now involved in questions around the future of manufacturing for the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. And though my background is in architecture, my interest is in how things get made. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's this huge collision happening inside of manufacturing, where there's this conversation about the future of manufacturing, all this technology and AI and, automated systems. And then there's the reality of how manufacturing is functioning in our country, which is a completely these are two conversations that are not happening conjoined. Totally. And I can see that there's some kind of reckoning on our horizon that's going to be very interesting. And doing research and doing projects around that has been super rewarding. So what's next? I'm not afraid to get further from operating machines, mm-hmm. but what I do want to do is work with really engaged, smart, kind people who want to have a positive impact. Mm-hmm. And like exactly what we're doing, I'd be happy doing a lot of different things.
Totally. So I'm glad you bring up kind of the future manufacturing stuff, because I think what you said about what's actually happening, and then this vision for the future that a lot of the, I guess, kind of major players, right, that are trying to support that vision are having, as far as the tools for automation and what's possible. I think there's this huge threshold people don't talk about adoption, the cost of adoption, not only the cost of adopting the technology, but transitioning like a factory floor or the training for the staff to be able to handle those new changes. And then also, of course, the huge kind of deficit in talent and not, I don't know, necessarily talent, but the people who are going to take on those jobs. And during the transition, it's like, sure, we can fantasize maybe about you don't need the people eventually or something like that. But that's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, you always need the people.
Yeah, and the people are still, of course, going to have to support the tools, even the automation tools and whatnot. We all know that. So I think, like you said, it is a huge conversation that is not happening enough with all the stakeholders kind of necessary, right? Happening in these kind of strange silos. Yes. But it'll be interesting to see, and to see these companies, in construction, in electrical, in plumbing, whatnot, have these huge programs around bringing people on. They'll train them. They'll have competitive salaries, because there is just, this generation is kind of retiring out, and there's not enough people to pick up the kind of mantle there. And with CNC operation jobs and all these different things.
Yep. Some big issues around an aging workforce that's in place. Big hurdles around workforce either retraining or workforce training for the new tools. Mm-hmm. And then, like you're talking about adoption, it's not just can you afford to buy the machine that's going to help you automate, but do you have Wi-Fi? Do you have internet? Do you have
IT, security, all of it?
Right. Yeah. And you're hiring for positions that you've never hired before. If you're bringing in this new piece of equipment, there's all these other questions. How do you get support on that machine? Especially if the support is now going to be offered through live video chats with an augmented reality overlay that's going to guide you through the fix. Is that something that your person who's already on your staff is comfortable doing? There are just these big gaps that are happening between the technology that's getting developed and what's existing, and how to help those converge. I think it's super interesting. I think there are folks who are out there chewing on these problems and see this coming. And I think, strangely, my course of experience has led me right into this tar pit.
Yeah, whether you wanted to be there or not.
So, like, even though my background is architecture and woodworking, somehow I've migrated around the block over to like digital design tools and fabrication tools, and then looking at these innovation spaces where they are being built to support innovators and entrepreneurs who are developing new technologies. Those new technologies are great to apply to like a tabula rasa situation where you can build out your brand new factory of the future.
Yeah.
But the truth is these factories are already there.
Yes.
In most cases. And then a lot of these entrepreneurs also want to leverage sort of this new manufacturing thing, opportunities like exometry, where they might be able to produce their product in a new way.
Yeah.
It's interesting and it's complicated and
a
I feel
whole
like
other podcast potentially.
Yeah.
Conversation.
Right.
Within that, sorry, not to interrupt.
No, it's just that my experience is mostly rooted in these like innovation spaces that are a hybrid between manufacturing space and a prototyping lab. Because a lot of times what the equipment that I'm speccing or supporting with my team is really at that like pre-manufacturing level, where you have CNC equipment that you could run hundreds of parts through, but we're probably just running to 5.
Yes. Yeah, similarly for DesignLab, but it also enables us to advise and have those conversations and introduce folks who may have never had the experience of seeing these tools on a factory floor in a manufacturing facility, get hands-on, access, training, whatever, introduction even to the tool in person, which is huge. In regards to the research you mentioned that you've done, was that just like personally driven that you took those projects on, or you were doing it again in conjunction with other companies and stuff? Okay.
Yep. And I'm interested in doing more because I'm sure you're experiencing with doing the podcast. It's fun to call people and interview them.
Totally. Definitely. So I'm going to do the total 180, but related still. I'd love to hear more about your woodworking practice and how this kind of thread, if you've managed to, keep it up throughout all these career changes we've been talking about, or career experiences, how it's informed some of that. You talked a little bit about how it's informed your appreciation for fabrication and tools and understanding of making throughout, again, kind of even beyond that. Would you say it influenced that, or how has it been a part of your life and kind of why?
Sure.
That was a lot.
I
think you get where I'm going.
Yeah, I think that woodworking practice might be an overstatement.
Okay.
It is, because I think when you say practice, I think it's something that's like consistent and, like an artistic practice is something you just keep going until you find ways forward. And I would say I have not been that consistent, but I have always done projects. It's part of what keeps me alive. My most recent project was building a treehouse, and
awesome.
I love doing some rough carpentry, where your margin for error is like up to a ½ inch, no problem. So that's been a lot of fun, but I'd say I always have something that I've got my hands on. And that is like almost an instinctual drive.
Yeah.
Over the years, I've kept my hands on different things by, building Halloween costumes with electronic actuators for the lights, or I bought a Vespa about 10 years ago, a 1970 Vespa, in part because I couldn't ever really figure out how engines worked. And so I got a Vespa with the world's simplest 2-stroke engine.
Figure it out.
And then proceeded to ask for help from everyone around me until I figured out how to get it running time and time again. So it's just, part of what keeps me alive. I dream of having the space and equipment at home to be able to go down.
Don't we all? Yeah.
And, like turnable in the back shed in the evenings. But the truth is, like, the last 5 years, my practice has been raising a family. And that's real.
How do you feel like you've been able to, I'm imagining, like, even through what you're saying, some of these examples, costumes, these different projects, do you feel like you're already seeing a similar drive in your children as far as making and the satisfaction that comes with that and kind of bringing things into reality, or even learning, these new skills and kind of this curiosity around it?
Sure. I mean, they're 2 and 4, so they just want to do stuff all the time. And it's amazing. It's amazing what they are pre-programmed, how interested and how much they want to just like explore and put their hands on.
Absorb everything.
Yeah. And I mean, like up to 2, they're doing that by putting everything in their mouths,
Right.
which is like not as fun and exciting.
Stressful.
Yeah. But now that they're doing things with their hands and building things with magnet tiles, it's fantastic.
Does it ever make you want to design toys?
Yeah.
Or not
conceptually.
Really? Yeah.
Theoretically,
Not in
yes.
actuality.
Yes.
I always think about that, like with designers and kids. I've asked some of our other guests too, who talk about their kids, and just, I feel like, I don't know why it'll be interesting to see if, or when I have kids one day, like if I would be super into that, but I imagine it'd be hard to resist like making things for them all the time. But obviously also if you have the time and, the space to do it and stuff, but I feel like it'd be such a fun design challenge of like making a better, toy or something with like real materials, because so much stuff is like plastic and whatnot. But that's not a real material, but I'm always like thinking about that with friends' kids or cousins or whatnot. So it's like, I feel like the designer in me can't help it, but maybe not everyone feels that way.
No, but I think I totally, I'm with you there. And yes, I often think about the things
Or
that
like
I
this could
wish
be better.
But the part that's the most fun is like watching what they do with a roll of blue tape.
Yes. All they want is a cardboard box.
Yeah.
Every time.
And
without fail.
As soon as I start to impose some idea of what I think the toy should be, or let's build a boat out of the Legos, it's like instantly so boring, because whatever it is that they were starting to do or they're going to eventually do is, I just need to get out of the way.
Totally.
So.
I can't remember if I already told this story on the podcast. Hopefully I'm not repeating myself. Maybe we'll cut it out. I'm not sure. But when I used to work at, I mentioned, ZM, now the Children's Creativity Museum, one of my favorite activities that we did is called the Mystery Box Challenge. And it was just a box of like donated supplies most of the time, pipe cleaners, toilet paper rolls, whatever, some kind of paper, markers, whatnot. And then we made this deck of cards that were, like, you're the size of a fly and you need to get out of a moving blender. What do you do? And then the kid, and all different ages from, I would say like 3 to 8 or 10 maybe, would get this box, get the card, you kind of leave them alone, sometimes together with other kids. And then you'd go back and check in on them. And this was something, we were trained as staff to, like, the most important part is like, go ask them at the end, what did they make? Because you could watch them and be like, it's a pile of tissue paper, but then you hear them explain it. Yeah. And it was so incredible, to just hear like a 5-year-old have this really elaborate solution that you never would have recognized just from looking at it. Right. Like, oh my gosh, you're a genius. How did you come up with that? And I love the way you created it. And so much is being filled in their minds,
Yes.
Which is so magical and something I think we're all kind of trying to get back to all the time. But I think speaks to kind of what you're saying about just sometimes you just have to get out of their way. Exactly.
Yeah. It's almost like providing the offcuts from a project would be more interesting than actually making the thing that an adult imagines.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're going to be way more creative and imaginative with it. Absolutely.
And empowered.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to be conscientious of our time. I'm going to ask you 2 last kind of rapid fire questions to wrap it up here. So, and we might have already maybe touched on this in the last couple of minutes of this conversation, but what's something outside of technology that's inspiring you these days?
What is inspiring me outside of technology right now? This may be in part response to coming out of the pandemic, but I would say like the closest people around me. And that might be because our circles got so much smaller that there's a lot more that I noticed, but seeing things that my siblings are doing and how my friends are responding to each other and how we're taking care of each other as a family, that is probably the thing that feels the most inspiring to me, in the sense of it's inspiring me to take action, to appreciate folks, and to notice.
So the last question we asked all of our guests is, what is on your personal bill of materials?
On my personal bill of materials right now, definitely like a wad of paper towels at any time. Just
pull it out of your back pocket.
Yeah, because there's
That's me and my Tide stick. Tide to go pens everywhere I go.
There you go. All right. Well, yeah, something is being spilled. Like the question in our house is, why is this wet?
Why is this sticky? Why is it wet?
Yeah, just why is this wet? You know, because it's you don't know why. So I mean, that's like the biggest volume order on my bill of materials right now. But I would also say a lot of water and staying hydrated.
It's a good one.
Yeah. And then maybe like a lot of water to swim in, water to be in,
yes,
water to soak in, because that's a big part of what makes me feel like a human, and brings me back down to earth.
Definitely. I love a lake.
And it's summer, and so water's on the mind. I mean,
Definitely. So thank you so much for the time, Jay. We covered so much ground. I do still think maybe we'll have to have a part 2, because again, any one of those topics we could dive so much further into. But yes, thank you so much. It's great to finally meet you in person, and excited to continue the conversation in the future.
Thanks for the time.
That was my conversation with JD Sassaman, the talented architect that is orchestrating Ford's e-mobility facilities in Detroit. Today we talked about the things you need to make the things you need to make, from tools to experience, and the importance of sharing knowledge. We also spoke of the challenges in corporate reorgs, Jay's passion for working with talented, curious people, and appreciation for the value of the creative process. See you next week. If you like The Bomb, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Supplyframe and Hackaday on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and DesignLab at Supplyframe DesignLab on Instagram and Twitter. The Bomb is a Supplyframe podcast produced by me, Majenta Strongheart, and Ryan Tillotson, written by Maggie Bowles and edited by Daniel Ferreira. Theme music is by Anna Hogbin, show art by Thomas Schneider. Special thanks to Giovanni Salinas, Bruce Dominguez, Thomas Woodward, Jin Kumar, Jordan Clark, the entire Supplyframe team, and you, our wonderful listeners. I'm your host, Majenta Strongheart. See you next week.